Watching Apollo footage of astronauts doing geology on the surface of the moon is a really great way to think about preparing for Artemis, for putting people on the lunar surface once again. We learn a lot in how they did science operations on the moon and what it's like to work on the moon. You see them doing geology. You see them taking rock samples, putting in a drive tube to take a core sample. You see them bouncing along the surface of the moon on the lunar rover that they used in Apollo 15 through 17. So it's a great way to help drive technology development for the next generation of spacesuits and geology sampling tools.
There's these facilities that help us train like we are on the lunar surface. You know, these 1.6G offload systems or putting people in the aquatic environment are great ways to train the mobility part, right? Like, what can you do and how different does it feel to be in 1.6G and do these tasks?
We've been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades now. The Apollo astronauts had literally hundreds of hours of training in geology before they flew to the moon. It's often said that the Apollo astronauts had the equivalent of a master's degree in geology by the time they flew to the moon. In the intervening decades since Apollo, we've been training astronauts who fly to the International Space Station because when they're on the ISS, they spend time observing the Earth, looking out the window, taking pictures of what they see on the Earth's surface. Now that we're looking at putting astronauts on the surface of the moon, we also take them into the field. We take them to field sites here on Earth that resemble field sites that we expect them to see on the moon.
That's the reason why we take them out into places that are unique, like volcanic landscapes or places that are analogous to the lunar surface, to train them on the scale and fidelity of science that you just can't recreate in these facilities.
And so by combining this classroom and field training, we're able to prep them for fundamentals of geology, the major driving lunar science questions that we have that we hope to address with the Artemis program, and teaching them how to do field work in relevant analog environments.
For just science aspects of developing new spacesuits, can it get you to where you need to go? And then once you get there, can you do the cool science that you need to do? And so that's, can you move effectively and efficiently in the suit to be able to collect the samples or use the tools or the instruments? For the visibility, it's like, can you make the necessary observations that you need to? Or does the suit have the lights on it that it needs to illuminate the surface and make the observations you need to? The lunar South Pole holds tremendous resources that are going to allow us to continue to explore. This is a place that we've never been before. There's so much to be learned from getting boots on the ground and exploring a unique place that challenges us as humans and also helps us develop technologies that make our everyday life that much better.
We think there might be volatiles present at the South Pole. By using these volatiles, we'll be able to do things like create drinking water, create rocket fuel to launch astronauts back to Earth. And so by harnessing the power of the land, we'll be able to help astronauts establish that long-term sustainable presence.
It's human nature to explore. Pushing our boundaries and exploring our universe is, I think, just one of those things that's just stuck in our human nature, and that we need to do it in order to understand the world around us, including our Earth and our solar system.
We just heard there how curiosity is just a part of us. So, with that in mind, why don't we do some social questions? Because some people are very curious to hear what you have to say about their questions. So why don't we pull up the first question here? What are your thoughts on the responsibilities that come with going to space? Obviously a question for you. I am not going to space.
Yeah, the opportunity to travel to space comes with a lot of responsibility. I think for all of us, it's a huge honor to be a part of these teams, and the work we're doing is so critical in supporting scientific discovery on the ground. So on the International Space Station, we're a national laboratory. Our crew executed over 350 different scientific experiments during our 6-month mission. And so when you think about that, it's years of work to get one of these payloads or an experiment on the space station.
Yes.
And sometimes that's someone's life's work you're holding in your hands and executing. And so being prepared for those moments is really important, and understanding how to bring the team from the ground into solving complex problems. We take that really, really seriously. And of course, we want to share what that experience is like. Only a few people have been able to go to space. And as we commercialize space, as low Earth orbit becomes more accessible, that'll change. But still, it's only available to some of us. So we really want to share what that's like and the perspective we gain from our time up there.
It's really great to see and hear that you guys acknowledge that, right? Like that this experiment that you're holding, that you're working on for 6 months, somebody has been working on literally for years. I mean, I've talked to some scientists and they're saying, oh, this has been my life's work, 20
Absolutely.
years of my life's work. So yeah, that was a really good question. I like that question a lot. Okay, we have another one from social media here. Astro Kayla, have you considered what you might say if you had the opportunity to be the first female to set foot on the moon's surface?
No, I have not considered that. If I was in that role, it's something I would take really seriously. I think the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are something that we all know, whether you witnessed that moment or not, or it happened before you were born. For me, I think we all have that embedded in our psyche, those important words. So I think it's something I would have to think a lot about ahead of that mission.
Yeah, that would be in the history books. That'll be something you're remembered for. Oh my gosh, I'd be so anxious delivering it, even after I've thought of what I want to say, like to actually open my mouth and say it from the surface of the moon. Wow. Yeah. That we'll have to think about that one for sure. Okay, let's see another question here. Oh, why is the spacesuit orange in color?
That's an awesome question that I wish I knew the answer to. Megan and I were actually talking about that earlier when we had Snoopy up here. It's a continuation of the same suit that we used during the shuttle era, and I was kind of hypothesizing that maybe it's to help forces if for some reason when we landed in the water we had to get out of the capsule for some reason, it would be easy to see us. But that I'm gonna have to take a phone a friend on that one, I think, to know the real answer. I'm sure somebody will be commenting on social media right now with what the real history behind the orange suit is.
I'm trying to think about it too. I'm thinking, does it have anything to do with SLS being orange because of the foam
match
insulation?
Your vehicle.
Yeah,
why not?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
I don't know. We got stumped. That was our first one that we got stumped on. Do we have another question? All right. If you could name one of the moon's craters, what would you name it?
Oh man. What would you name it, Megan? I don't know. That's a big decision.
I thought you might say the name of your zero-G graph.
Oh, FOW? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty big responsibility, I think, to name these geological features. And a lot of the craters on the moon already have names. So I'm sure there's some that maybe they haven't named, they're too small, or we haven't explored them yet. But a lot of them already do have names. Like, we're going to be exploring the edge of Shackleton Crater as part of Artemis mission. So a lot of them are already named and mapped.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing it back on me. I was like, I don't know. Do you think our parents or husband or fiance are now upset that we didn't say them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think they understand.
All right.
These are big decisions.
This is. All right. Last question here, for this segment at least. What will Orion do when it gets to the moon?
So for this mission, Artemis 1, it's actually going to orbit the moon and then go into a distant retrograde orbit. And so it'll get really close as 62 miles, and then go way past the moon and way deeper into space than we've ever been before. So yeah, the Orion vehicle will be checking out all of its systems. We're going to be analyzing that data from the ground, and then we're going to see that it can survive re-entry and a successful splashdown off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, that was a good question too. Okay, well again, just keep those questions coming. We're entering into this launch window, and we do have time, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to try at least to answer most of your questions. So you've been hearing throughout the broadcast all the different science that returning to the moon will enable us to do. So there's actually something called the Prime 1 mining experiment, and that's going to robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface.
NASA's first Polar Resources ice mining experiment, also known as Prime 1, will robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface. Thanks to data from spacecraft orbiting the Moon, scientists believe that the polar regions contain water ice in the form of ice just below the surface. With the right technologies, that ice is a game-changing resource that can be mined and used to produce propellant and breathable oxygen for future explorers. Under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, the agency selected intuitive machines to fly and land Prime 1 on the Moon's south pole. Prime 1 will land near the Shackleton crater to drill into the lunar soil in an area that could contain water ice. Prime 1 is made up of two instruments, Trident, the regolith and ice drill for exploring new terrain, and M-SOLO, the mass spectrometer observing lunar operations. Trident will drill up to 3 feet into the lunar surface, extract lunar soil, and bring it up to the surface. Trident drills to its maximum depth in multiple phases, stopping at different increments. As it reaches each desired depth, it will pause and retract the drill string to deposit lunar soil on the surface for analysis. This is where M-SOLO comes in. M-SOLO is a commercial off-the-shelf mass spectrometer modified for spaceflight. It will evaluate the chemical elements and compounds released from the lunar soil for water and other chemical compounds. Trident will then proceed to the next specified depth and repeat the process until samples at all desired depths have been analyzed for water. If no ice is found where Prime 1 lands, NASA will still collect valuable information about drilling into the lunar soil for a future mission. NASA's Viper, the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration rover, will use Prime 1 technology on a mobile robot that will navigate the Moon's south pole searching for additional resources. Prime 1 data will help NASA assess lunar resources to inform future Artemis missions and a robust human presence on the Moon.
So we are still awaiting a new T0 for today's launch attempt, but for more on what to expect when we launch for this first day, let's go to NASA's Dan Hewitt. He's inside our Apollo Saturn V Center at the KSC Visitor Complex.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. There's a lot of people here in the complex. I just heard a woo-hoo. People are getting in and out because we have a great view of launch when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen today. But that launch is just the first step in the Artemis 1 mission. So let's look at what's ahead for this historic first flight. As we just said, launch is step number 1. Those 4 RS-25 engines throttle up, followed shortly after by the 2 solid rocket boosters igniting, sending SLS and Orion skyward. Now on our way uphill, we'll have a number of jettison events. You'll be able to see things coming off of the SLS rocket. One of the most visual ones will be these 2 solid rocket boosters. Now they'll expend their propellant a little over 2 minutes into the flight. They will separate. We'll see them flare off onto either side, and then the core stage continues to fire. We're also going to see the launch abort system come off the top. Once you get high enough in the atmosphere, it's no longer required. You could actually do aborts using engines on Orion and its service module. I will also note that on the launch abort system, it's got those 3 solid rocket motors. The jettison motor is active. The abort and the attitude ones are not for this flight. We don't have people, so we're not flying a fully active abort system. We also have 3 fairings that are there to protect Orion, the service module and the crew module, as we're flying up through the really dense parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Next up, we'll hit core stage separation. So we've got 4 main engines. We'll hear MECO, main engine cutoff. Those engines will shut down, the core stage will separate, drop away. It's eventually going to splash down in the ocean. And that hands over the propulsion duties to this, our upper stage, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. Its first job is to execute what's known as a perigee raise maneuver. So the perigee is the lowest part of your orbit. You have a perigee, that's your low part, and an apogee, that's your highest point. We're going to raise up the perigee, and that's going to actually put us in a nice circular path around the planet. And while we're there, that gives us time to check out Orion. We're flying it in space for the second time, the first time in this fully integrated stack with SLS. We'll be able to look at all of Orion's systems, make sure those solar arrays are capturing the sun's energy and turning it into electrical power. for Orion systems, make sure the communications are working, all of our guidance, navigation, and control. That is your time to make sure you have a healthy spacecraft before you do something that is going to send it to the moon. And that's next up on our list. That's the trans-lunar injection. For today's launch profile, that's going to be a firing of about 18 minutes of that single engine on the upper stage. Now that engine optimized for a vacuum, it's producing about 24,000 pounds of thrust. So it's a pretty big engine, and it's doing that because we need enough energy to be able to send our payload, Orion, beyond low Earth orbit and send it on a path to head out to the moon. Now after that burn is complete, ICPS separates. It's going to do what's called a disposal burn. So it's going to send itself on a path from Earth around the moon and slingshot out into what's known as a heliocentric orbit. So it's going to completely leave the Earth-Moon system and go into orbit around our sun. But after it separates, propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module, and it's got a couple of different engines that it's going to be using, and we're going to be testing those out just on day one. We're going to do what's called the Outbound Trajectory Correction Burn 1. And we'll do a couple of these trajectory corrections as we're flying out to the moon, but that first one is that first critical test of this large engine, the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. That's the one that has the most thrust, generating about 6,000 pounds of force in a vacuum, and that's what's going to be doing a lot of our maneuvers, or giving us that pushing power as we do these maneuvers around the moon to enter into what's known as Distant Retrograde Orbit, or DRO. And that's this dotted line that you see around here. Now we call it distant basically because of the distance we're away from the moon. We're about 40,000 miles, a little bit less, off the lunar surface. And then we call it retrograde because the moon orbiting planet Earth in this direction, going in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be entering into a clockwise orbit around the moon, opposite retrograde. Now to do that, we're going to get in close, we're going to dip in off the lunar surface. We're going to be about 80 miles, 80 statute miles off the lunar surface as we do this outbound powered flyby. Again, the major thrust coming from that Orbital Maneuvering System engine. After we do that, we'll do a final maneuver to actually go into that distant retrograde orbit, that DRO. Now, why DRO? Why are we not just going around the moon and coming back on like a free return trajectory, which we did on some of the Apollo missions? Well, in DRO, it's a very stable orbit. It doesn't require a lot of fuel to maintain that area around the moon. So it gives you a lot of time to really test the spacecraft. If you followed with any launch of a new spacecraft, you know there's only so much testing you can do on the ground. Once you actually put all of that hardware in space, in the environment that it's going to be operating, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, you're going to learn things you didn't even realize about everything from communications, the life support systems, the thermal control. Everything on a spacecraft needs to get put through its paces in this environment before we put people on board, and that's why we're heading out to DRO. Eventually, though, it's going to be time to come home, and we will do a DRO departure maneuver. This, again, firing up that Orbital Maneuvering System engine and others on the service module, and this is what's going to commit us from leaving the moon and heading on back towards Earth. We'll dip in once more, close off the lunar surface, slingshot and use the lunar gravity to do this return-powered flyby, and then, similar to the way out, we can make correction burns as we kind of fine-tune our path back towards the Earth. And then it's time for re-entry. A couple of things happen before that. One of the really critical ones, spacecraft separation. We're going to detach the European Service Module shortly before re-entry. Its job largely done. That burns up in the Earth's atmosphere and reveals on the crew module the heat shield. I circled it earlier. This is goal number 1 of the Artemis mission. Artemis 1 mission is testing this heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we make that trip around the moon and we come back, we are going in speeds of excess of 20,000 miles an hour. So when we slam into the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to heat that thing up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the Artemis 1 profile, we're going to do what's known as a skip re-entry. So basically, you can come in too shallow and skip off the atmosphere, too narrow, and you're going to do what's known as a ballistic entry, which really heats things up. We're going to do kind of a mix where we're going to skip once off the atmosphere and that we're still going to get the heat, but that helps to reduce some of the G loads on the crew. Once you're through that, you get to parachute deploy. There's 11 parachutes in total that are going to slow Orion down before it splashes down. We're going to be going from 20,000 miles an hour to about 300 miles an hour before those parachutes deploy, and then they do a final job of getting it in the water in the South Pacific. We've got these big orange balloons. That's an uprighting system, so even if Orion landed in the water upside down, those can inflate, and they put us back upright into what's known as stable 1. That's where you want your spacecraft to be, nice and upright in the water, especially if you're an astronaut in there floating. Now, we also have a large U.S. Navy ship with a big bay that's going to basically come up and swallow Orion into its deck, and you've got a couple of other assets in the area to help recover hardware, the forward bay cover, parachutes, things like that. But that's scheduled to happen 26 days after a launch today. So that's 26 days from liftoff here in Florida around the moon to a splashdown in the Pacific, and that will be the first mission in the Artemis program, the farthest we've ever sent a human-rated spacecraft in history, and just the first step before we put people on board. So that's a look at everything still to come. We're counting down to that launch. I'll send it back over to Megan and the team at the host desk, guys.
A very comprehensive look at that. Thank you so much, Dan. If you're just joining us, welcome to Kennedy Space Center and our live coverage of Artemis 1, an uncrewed flight test that will return us to the moon in nearly 50 years. But some might ask, why the moon? Well, here's why.
We are going. The history of this agency is marked with broken barriers, once viewed as impossible, with science fiction turned reality, with innovations that have spun industries all their own, and with demonstrations of peace for all humankind.
We soar in the skies of our home planet. We maintain a human presence just outside of gravity, and we touch points all across the solar system and beyond. We're going back to the moon, and this is why.
The moon is a treasure trove of science. It holds opportunities for us to make discoveries about our home planet, about our sun, and about our solar system.
The wealth of knowledge to be gleaned from the moon will inspire a new generation of thought and action.
Without fail, every major program and mission NASA has invested in has led to technologies and capabilities that have shaped our culture.
The breakthroughs of the Artemis era will define our generation and the generations to follow.
The tens of thousands of jobs associated with propelling us to the moon today are just the beginning of a lunar economy that will see hundreds of thousands of new jobs develop around the world.
This is not an ambition of one entity or one country. The exploration of the moon is a shared effort,
woven together by a desire for the greater good.
Why the moon? Because the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by the accomplishments of the Artemis generation today.
Because the ambition to go has already begun.
And because Mars is calling. We need to learn what it takes to establish a community on another cosmic shore. So let's camp close before pushing out.
And so, we go to the moon now, not as a series of isolated missions, but to build a community on and around the moon capable of proving how to live on other worlds.
We'll use the lessons from more than 50 years of peaceful exploration to send a new generation to the lunar surface to stay.
We will anchor our efforts on the lunar South Pole to establish the Artemis Base Camp,
positioning us for long-term science and exploration of the lunar surface.
We will prove what it takes to assemble a complex ship in deep space.
We will perfect descending down to and returning from a distant surface.
We will learn how humans can survive and thrive in a partial gravity environment.
With improved spacesuit designs, mobile habitats, and with reconnaissance robots pre-positioning and relocating supplies.
We will learn how to utilize the resources we find on these other worlds, starting with finding water ice and purifying it to drinkable water.
And refining that into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen to breathe.
We will establish fission power plants on the surface of the moon, capable of supporting a growing community of efforts.
And we will expand the logistics supply chain to enable commercial and international partners
to resupply and refuel deep space outposts.
None of this is simple or easy, but nothing in our history ever has been.
The Eagle has landed. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This kind of continuous lunar presence is a natural extension of all that we've learned in low Earth orbit. And what we will accomplish there will ensure the monumental missions to Mars are within reach. As we ready the launch of the first Artemis mission, and as commercial companies ready their lunar landers for the first private payload deliveries, we have already begun to take the next step.
Throughout this launch broadcast, our NASA's Leah Martin has been introducing us to people over at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex who have come out for hopefully the maiden voyage of Artemis 1. People from near and far, young and old, just really excited to hopefully see this historic flight. So now she's joined by somebody else who has a really interesting story. Leah, tell us about it.
Megan, I think one of the most exciting things about being here tonight is being with people who are like-minded, who have such a strong tie to the history of our nation's space program and their love of spaceflight. And I actually struck up an amazing conversation with Scott here, and you were telling me about the special tie that you have to tonight's launch as well.
Oh yeah, I literally grew up with NASA. My father went to work with the NPSA before NASA. Went to work for Dr. Von Braun, followed him over to Marshall Space Flight Center, and became, when it became NASA. He worked on the Jupiter C, Redstone, Saturn I, Saturn V, and then because of that, he brought me here to see Apollo 11 launch. So that was my first launch. I was 5 years old. I loved it. Still remember the sound. That's about all. And then years later, through my flying career, I was able to bring my sons back with my friends that flew the shuttle, and they saw 5 launches and 4 landings. But basically, I wanted to be here. I was here for the first moon launch, the last moon launch back when Uncle Gene Cernan, our family friend, went to on Apollo 17. So I wanted to be here for this because it's kind of in our family, in our blood. And hopefully I'll be around for the next one when we go and land again. So that's
incredible. So you have NASA actually in your DNA, grew up with the program.
Yeah. I knew most of the German scientists. The kids sat in our lap, Dr. Ernst Stirlinger, and my father flew with Von Braun. They'd get off work and fly, and they were in Life magazine together, National Geographic, so it was fun. I literally knew Al Shepard, all the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo guys, and it was an honor. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I went a different route, but I can still come here and see them.
We can, and we're so grateful, so thrilled to see you here tonight, and so excited that you will be able to actually compare the last launch and the sound of the last one with the one tonight. It's absolutely going to rock the sky.
I want it to be even louder. I want to feel it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to meet you, and Megan, we're going back to you.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a fun story. Here we are now at Space Center Houston. This is a live look inside of the visitor center there. Lots of people hoping to see the launch today. I love this guy in the front with his NASA shirt representing. And again, just seeing children and young and old, just all these people who feel captivated and are excited about our next giant leap into deep space. So glad to have them here. Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah, the team in Marshall and Huntsville there is always ready for their shot, waving their flags. They're super pumped. That's the home to the SLS program office, so they have a dog in the fight tonight, seeing Artemis launch for the first time.
Is that an inflatable astronaut in the center? Do you see that? I think somebody is dressed up as an astronaut.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they're
representing.
Ready to go.
I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad that they're there. Again, these visitor centers are closed to the public, but you know, the people there decided to hold a watch party.
Oh,
and
look,
that's
our
exciting
friends in
to see.
Germany are ready for us this time.
I know,
they
clapping.
anticipated the delay. They look pumped and ready to go.
So these are employees of Airbus. Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together they provided the European service module for the Orion spacecraft. So really, we should be applauding them. They shouldn't be applauding. Thank you so much, guys, for your contribution to the program, and can't wait to see Orion and SLS launch. Okay, so now let's head back over to Daryl Nail over with the launch team so we can hear any updates about a new T0.
Yeah, Megan, thank you. And a clearer picture is starting to emerge as the launch team now reports out that they only have a few minutes left of work to do before they're ready to pick up polling. And we're also hearing that some of that polling, which kicks off with the mission management team, is also now just about 3.5 minutes away. Now, we are currently still in that hold. But the launch team, NASA's test director, is continuing to move the team forward. We've wrapped up work on the upper stage and the lower stage. You're looking now live inside Firing Room 1, where Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson is overseeing her launch team. We've had a number of delays that have put us off the T0, but we are starting to track to a T0 close to around a quarter till, top of the hour. But we do need to have some polling that takes place. I'm pausing now because I'm listening in to the teams as they communicate. In this launch window, which we're currently 26 minutes into, and it's 2 hours long, it runs until 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time, we have what's called 40 cutouts. And in those cutouts, they range from about a second to about a minute. These are times where they can't launch. These cutouts must be accounted for when determining a new T0. The upper stage of the rocket, which was the last to get ready and configured, just recently the team cycled the liquid hydrogen valves, which is required, and they are currently working on the LO2 valves, liquid oxygen valves in the upper stage. That work is almost done. We are now a minute and a half away from the poll of the mission management team, which is several minutes before T-minus 15 minutes. When that poll starts, we'll get a clearer picture of our T0. NASA's test director has informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 230, 232. And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there, whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA Test Director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch. Great news. Again, no constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch. Okay, NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close. We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen in.
LPs go. And rockets go. All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And attention on 232, this is the Launch Director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range Weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy, LWO. And Mission Manager. And Mission Manager, Launch Director.
Launch Director, Mission Manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, Launch Director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Copy, Launch Director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD.
CVSE here.
Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time.
In work.
R, NTD.
RSR here.
Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from Launch Director.
Early.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time. The poll that you heard was the NASA test director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock. GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
Oh, 1:47:44, 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time and 44 seconds. We went straight into terminal count. Liftoff now 9 minutes away. So terminal count. Control has been given over to the GLS, the ground launch sequencer, a computer and software that is doing all of the commanding and monitoring of the space launch system. We'll hear callouts from the GLS operator, Alex Pandalos. As well as NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding. GLS is pre-tensioning the umbilicals at this very moment. You can see them as they run down the rocket. That's getting them ready to detach. At liftoff, those arms will swing away. We'll let go of the rocket in a clockwise direction. T-minus 8 minutes and counting. The GLS is performing up to 100 commands per second, including configuring ground systems for power transfer to the rocket. GLS is turning on cameras, recording video inside and outside the crew module to collect data for engineers. Purging the aft skirt booster with high flow nitrogen. Clear out any hydrogen gas that may be there. You can see the crew access arm is already retracted. When there is crew during Artemis 2, it would happen at T-minus 6 minutes. But out of abundance of caution, they went ahead and retracted the arm well ahead of liftoff. Want to point your attention to the base of the mobile launcher. If something wasn't done to reduce the power from the pressure caused by the rocket's ignition and thunderous sound, it could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at T-minus 17 seconds. Now coming up in less than 30 seconds, the ground launch sequencer will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with core stage pressurization. Firing room 1 is completely silent as they listen for the next call.
GLS's go for core stage tank pressurization.
The core stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels. The replenish valve to the liquid hydrogen tank now closing. The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion ascent pyros and transfer to internal power. The Launch Abort System, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the Flight Termination System, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS's go for FTS arm.
The Flight Termination System is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS's go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues. T-minus 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Up next, GLS fires up the KPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS's go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engines gimbal at the bottom of the core stage. At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
GLS's go for purge sequence 4.
And in just a few seconds, GLS will close the core stage LOX vent, liquid oxygen. The white vapor cloud caused from the super cold gaseous oxygen condensing the water in the atmosphere will disappear. You see it coming out there now. And there it goes, it's closed. LOX vent closed, pressure rising in the core stage LOX tank to flight levels. Coming up in 15 seconds, look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal. And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance. Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS is go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. but the ALS will check. Make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2
GLS
seconds.
is go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Silencer pressure water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes, 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes, 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour. Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff. And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad. Megan and Kayla, I've got to hear all about it.
Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we just watched Artemis 1 launch, our first step towards our next adventure into deep space. As Leah said, I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. And I'm kind of still giddy and speechless. I don't even know how to explain how I'm feeling right now.
I feel the same way. This is the first launch that I've been able to watch in person. And I've got to say, it was incredible. It took my breath away, and I was tearing up just what an amazing accomplishment for this team, this international team, people who have been dedicating their careers to getting this rocket off the ground and taking the first step to getting a crew on that vehicle back to the moon. It was just incredible.
Yeah, this is a moment I think that we're all going to remember where we were when we saw this sort of thing, you know what I mean? And it was great to see, again, when we entered into terminal count, everybody here just started cheering, you know, coming out to get a really good view. And boy, I mean, it lit up the night sky and it just shook everything around us. Did you feel that? Like in my bones, I felt that.
Oh yeah, the cool thing is just kind of the delay between what you see and what you hear, because of course the sound travels a little bit slower, and it was just amazing. The ground shook. We could hear the thrust pushing that rocket into space. 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
Yes.
It's incredible. It was amazing to see here live in person.
How does it compare? So this is your first launch on the ground. How does it compare to your launch when you're in the capsule soaring towards space?
I mean, equally emotional, I think.
Yeah.
We train for everything, and so when we're in that capsule waiting for launch, we're just running our procedures. You could almost, you know, trick us and say that we were in the simulator and it wasn't real, but like in that moment of liftoff, when the thrust builds underneath you, like we saw it today, it's just hard not to be overwhelmed by the emotional experience, the excitement, the joy of that moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think we can't say it enough. This team really deserved this moment. They've been working so hard for this moment. When I heard that we got into terminal count, it was, I felt a sense of relief and excitement for them that I think everybody here did. You know, we really wanted them to succeed. We really wanted to see the launch today. And wow, I will never forget this.
Me neither. It was an incredible experience to be here and see that happen.
Yeah. Was there anything that was particularly surprising to you? Again, this is your first launch. You know, what were you expecting?
You know, I think we also had a nighttime launch for our launch. And so I think one thing you underestimate is how much it lights up the night sky.
Yes.
We were able to watch it all the way through that trajectory. We were able to see the boosters separate and everything. So it was just an incredible view. It's amazing how much you get to see of the flight path when it's at night and sliding up the sky.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, but we see the moon here, and the trajectory of the rocket looked like it was flying towards me. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my God, that's so poetic. It's so beautiful. I'm so glad we launched today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations to the team. It's incredible.
We're going to head over to Daryl, who was at the launch team. Daryl, you got to count us down through that, through liftoff. I mean, how was that being in the launch control center with them?
Well, Megan, it was something else. I got to tell you, you're looking live inside the firing room where Charlie Blackwell-Thompson is about to address her team after a whole lot of hard work and preparation to get to this moment. Let's stand by and listen to her now.
Comm check. But you can't hear it in the room. Can you guys hear me? No.
Hey, Jeremy, can you take a picture of something on the air for the microphone? The press site can hear me, but the room can't. The room can't. You can hear me? Because the guys... I don't know what he's telling me to do.
He's here.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, there we go. Is he ready for me? Well, for once, I might be speechless. So you guys know I have talked a lot about appreciating the moment that you're in, and we have worked hard as a team. You guys have worked hard as a team for this moment. This is your moment. It is not by chance that you are here today. So I want you to look around at this team and know that you have earned it. You have earned your place in the room. You have earned this moment. You have earned your place in history. You were part of a first. Doesn't come along very often. Once in a career, maybe. But we are all part of something incredibly special, the first launch of Artemis. The first step in returning our country to the moon and on to Mars. What you have done today will inspire generations to come. So thank you. Thank you for your resilience. You know, I said at the pre-test briefing, the harder the climb, the better the view. We showed the Space Coast tonight. What a beautiful view it is. So congratulations. So we got a couple of traditions here in launch control. And the first one is when you're in the position for the first time, you get a tie cutting. And so I have my launch director scissors. And I'm going to get my tie cut by a couple of legends that are here. And then anyone who wants their tie cut will be making the rounds in the firing room. You got your console chiefs. If they want to do it, that's fine. If you want me to do it, you might have to wait a little while, but I'll stay all night if I have to. It'll be my pleasure to cut ties. So I'm going to take care of mine, and then I have one other presentation that I want to make this evening.
This is Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, Artemis 1 launch director. She just got her tie cut. That is a tradition here at NASA. We just got to hear her talk to the team, and one thing that really stuck out to me that she said is that they've really earned their place in history. We're coming up on solar array deploy. Let's go on to Leah.
Thanks, Megan. And yes, we're here in Mission Control Houston, still monitoring the Artemis 1 mission and the first flight of Orion atop the Space Launch System. So far, we saw successful liftoff at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time, all the way through separation from the core stage. We now have Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage flying free. And we've just heard that we have initiated solar array deploy. So we are turning our focus to that. The spacecraft was running on battery power, but stretching things wings will allow it to stop relying on those batteries and significantly extend the time it can stay in space. So solar array deploy takes about 12 minutes. We have 4 solar arrays that we need to deploy and latch. These will provide power to the spacecraft on its journey to distant retrograde orbit and all the way back to Earth. Once these are properly configured, again, Orion will no longer need to rely solely on battery power. And we expect this to be done about 30 minutes after liftoff. Right now, we're 19 minutes since liftoff today. Orion is now traveling 17,175 miles per hour. We're continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston from the flight controllers monitoring the mission. A little bit about these solar arrays as we wait. Again, we heard the call that the deploy has been initiated. We'll hear a little bit more about that once they start to unfold. These 4 solar arrays generate 11 kilowatts of power, which is enough electricity to power 2 3-bedroom houses, and they have a wingspan of 63 feet. Just one of these 6.5 by 6.5 foot panels has 1,250 solar cells. So you're looking at a total of 15,000 solar cells. Now, we just heard the call that all 4 solar arrays have been released. So we initially heard the initiation call. That command had been sent. Now those 4 solar arrays are released. Again, this is about a 12-minute process. These solar arrays will deploy straight, and you're getting a live view right now. This is really exciting. They'll eventually be swept back against the vehicle prior to translunar injection burn to prevent any loads from breaking or damaging the arrays. And on the end of each solar array is a camera that will capture imagery for us throughout the mission, along with a few other cameras placed outside and inside the spacecraft to help us monitor and perform various other inspections. Of course, if you recall the Apollo capsule design, there were no solar arrays. We had fuel cells instead. So this design with arrays gives us the opportunity to stay in orbit longer since we practically have no limit to the energy available for use from the sun. Coming up on 21 minutes since liftoff. Orion is attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. You can see those 4 solar arrays unfolding now. And again, Artemis 1 is a flight test. It's paving the way for a sustainable presence at the moon. Looking forward to the future, Gateway will be our space station in lunar orbit. And we have some similarities and differences in the solar arrays unfolding right now on Orion and those that'll be on Gateway. So like we're seeing now, these are deploying autonomously. The Gateway solar arrays will as well. And while these generate those 11 kilowatts of power, the 2 rollout solar arrays, or ROSAs, on Gateway will generate 60 kilowatts of power. That ROSA design is currently being tested aboard the space station. We have 2 new ones installed and a spacewalk conducted earlier today, preparing for another set. Coming up on 22 minutes since liftoff today, Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage traveling over 16,800 miles per hour. The solar arrays deploying now are part of the European service module. It's comprised of 20,000 parts and components. The service module was developed as part of an agreement between NASA and the European Space Agency, or ESA. This is the first time NASA is using a European-built system as a critical element to power an American spacecraft. Coming up now, in 24 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, spacecraft now traveling at 16,500 miles per hour around the Earth. We are in solar array deploy, and we have confirmation all 4 arrays are deployed. Coming up in a little less than 30 minutes is the perigee raise maneuver. And with our launch at 1:41 Eastern Time this morning, we are looking for a perigee raise maneuver about 53 minutes into today's flight. Again, we are now 25 minutes and 47 seconds into the flight, and we have a complete deployment of all 4 solar arrays. Orion's journey to the moon continues as planned. Again, looking forward to that perigee raise maneuver. That'll be coming up again at about 53 minutes into the mission, so about 27 minutes from now. During the perigee raise maneuver, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will use its RL-10 engine to lift the lowest point of Orion in Earth's orbit. The current orbit is more of an oval shape than a perfect circle, and this burn will raise that point closest to Earth and make the orbit more circular. This will also include a checkout of Orion's systems and any adjustments to the solar arrays. It'll be a short burn, less than 30 seconds long, but critical to keep us on track, and it also prepares us for the next engine burn to send Orion to the moon. That's the translunar injection burn. That'll come up a little later, which is a longer burn, another firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. We caught a glimpse there of those solar arrays, and with all 4 solar arrays properly deployed, Orion's journey to the moon continues, and we've got more operational updates coming up shortly, but for now, I'm going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla at Kennedy.
Leah, thank you so much. Our return to the moon will be different than the last time. We plan to explore more of the lunar surface and learn how to live and work there. With more on our destination, let's bring back NASA's Dan Hewitt with our new moon board.
Hey, thanks, Megan. I got to be honest, we ran outside to catch it. I'm still shaking a little bit. That never gets old. That is always one of the coolest things you'll ever see in your entire life. And that rocket was massive and loud and just so cool. All right, the moon. This is why we call it the moon board, but the moon, you know, since the dawn of time, humans have looked at the sky and shouted at our neighbor, "I'm going to walk in your face." And in the 60s, we actually did it. 6 times, starting with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11, 1969, followed by 5 more successive landings, each time delivering 2 human beings to the surface of the moon. Our last one was Apollo 17, and that was in 1972, Gene Cernan and Harrison Smith stepping off for the last time. Now, we have not sent humans back since then, but they accomplished a lot under Apollo. Lots of technological advancements, deployed science instruments, brought back hundreds of pounds of lunar rocks and regolith, teaching us about the moon and also about our place in the solar system. The moon is fascinating because it doesn't have a lot of the geological processes we have here on Earth. You don't have erosion, you don't have wind and water wearing down rocks, you don't have plate tectonics that are constantly recycling the crust, and so everything out there is really old. In fact, one of the rocks brought back on Apollo 15, called the Genesis rock, was dated to be 4 billion years old, so from the primordial beginnings of our solar system. But as Kayla said a little bit earlier, those missions were measured in days, their spacewalks in just hours. With Artemis, we're looking to go and we're looking to stay. And we're not looking around the equator like under Apollo. We're looking at the lunar South Pole. Now, why? So we haven't sent people since the 70s to the moon, but we haven't stopped studying it. We've had orbiters like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has literally just been flying loops around the moon, taking high-resolution images of the surface, so high resolution that you can look them up. They have images of all the different Apollo landing sites, and you can actually see the footprints, the paths they left in the lunar regolith of those sites. We had a mission called L-Cross, which slammed a probe into a crater on the moon, sending out material, some of which potentially hadn't seen direct sunlight for billions of years, and then analyzing what shot out. And through missions like that and others, we've been able to find that there is water ice trapped in those permanently shadowed areas on the moon. A lot of them center around that South Pole. We have already identified 13 potential landing sites for the Artemis 3 mission. And these are where we're going to send our astronauts around the lunar South Pole to access that water ice. Now, why water? Why are we caring about water? Well, it serves a lot of purposes. Obviously, for humans, you need that to breathe. You can split water apart, get oxygen for breathing gas for an atmosphere. If you have a lunar base, you can split it into oxygen and hydrogen. That's rocket fuel. We just launched the most powerful rocket in history using those constituent parts. And so you can start to live off the land. We can use that, something called in situ resource utilization. And really, the whole point of that is to use the moon as this proving ground. We're trying to get to Mars. We're trying to learn to live on other planets where there is gravity, where we're going to have to use resources there on the ground because we won't be able to bring everything with us. And by going to the lunar South Pole, by going to stay under Artemis, we're going to be able to start practicing that. We're going to perfect those systems, perfect those techniques and operations we need to do that so we can use the moon as that jumping off point to Mars and beyond. So that's why the moon. We're going to see Orion fly around it for the very first time in just a couple of days. That launch was spectacular. I'm still way too excited, but can't wait to see some shots of the moon from up close from Orion. So I'll send it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Stan. So right now we're actually joined by members of the Red Crew. You'll remember from watching the launch coverage that the Red Crew was sent out by the launch team when the launch team identified a small leak on a hydrogen valve inside of the mobile launcher. Well, now here they are. This is Trent Annis. Trent, can you just introduce everybody else here on your team?
Yeah, so this is Chad. He's our safety guy. And behind me is Billy. And he's the experienced hydrogen tech out here.
And the three of you guys really, I would say, saved the day today. I mean, really, you guys had to go in there to what's called the blast danger zone. You guys are specially trained to be able to do operations on the pad while cryo is loading. Talk to us about getting that call, being told, hey, you guys need to go in there. And it was the first time for all three of you.
Yeah, all I could say is we were very excited. I was ready to get up there and go.
Really? How are you guys feeling?
Very, very comfortable, very confident in the test team and the procedures and our training. We did a great job.
Walk us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So how gratifying it must be for you guys, because you train for this eventuality, but don't always get to do it. Billy was saying that he's been a Red Crew team member for 37 years, and this is the first time he's been called to go into the blast danger zone. So I know for us, when we're training for all of these eventualities, whether it's a spacewalk or robotics operations, you really want to put that training into practice. How do you guys feel like it went today?
Amazing. I still can't believe it. It's surreal to me. It's just insane.
Yeah, kind of walk us through what you were thinking. So you get there and what, is it just like game time and you're really focused, or, you know, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'd say we were very focused on what was happening up there, just making sure we knew what was happening. Because the rocket's, you know, it's alive, it's creaking, it's making venting noises, it's pretty scary. So on zero deck, my heart was pumping. Mm-hmm. My nerves were going, but yeah, we showed up today. I think as soon as we walked up the stairs, we were ready to rock and roll.
And they were telling us a bit about it while you were working on it. You guys were actually just torquing down the valve to prevent or reduce the leak rate or stop the leak. Is that right?
That's right. Just the packing gland. It was a little loose, so went up there and tightened her up.
You're probably still like in this, oh my gosh moment, like all of us are. You know, has it actually hit you, like the role you played today in making Artemis 1 launch?
You know, I still can't believe it. Like, it's, like I said, it's surreal and just amazing. I don't know about you guys, but
they're nodding along behind you for sure. Anything you want to say to the launch team? Again, this is a big day for the launch team, for you guys, NASA, but really the whole world. I mean, this is a historic launch that I think we'll all remember. Really.
You know, we had a lot of people here helping us out, a lot of teams, firing room. I'm sure that was hectic. And, you know, NASA, Boeing, all the other companies did a great job, and we're glad to be part of it.
One thing I always like to say is spaceflight is a team sport, and I think you guys perfectly demonstrated that today, right? Like, none of us could accomplish this on our own. It takes a really complex team. Nobody can be an expert in all of the systems, all the technology, all the workarounds we might have to do to get a rocket off the pad. So thank you for the role you played in that team today. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you coming by to talk with us. All right, it's now been about 35 minutes since liftoff of Artemis 1. Orion and ICPS are now free flying, so let's head back to Leah again to talk about how the journey is going so far.
Thanks, Megan. And it has been a pretty smooth ride so far. And we are now, again, like you mentioned, coming up on 36 minutes since launch. That puts us about 17 minutes into the until the perigee raise maneuver. That's going to be the maneuver that lifts the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and puts us where we need to be ahead of the translunar injection burn. The translunar injection burn is that really long burn that we're going to need to send us on to the moon. So we've been treated to some exciting views from the spacecraft today, including, and we hope to see some from inside the cabin, but we expect to continue receiving photo updates throughout the mission. It takes a team, though, to bring the imagery of Orion down to Earth, so let's meet them.
The imagery that we're collecting on Artemis 1 and the mission itself is preparing to carry humans to the moon. The Orion Imager team is going to be monitoring every aspect of visual spacecraft performance for the entire duration of the mission. The first time that we're going to be live streaming digital video from its spacecraft back down to the Earth from the vicinity of the moon. That's never been done before. What we'll be transmitting live streaming will be lower resolution, more compressed, because we have to fit it into a thinner pipe, if you will. Every one of these cameras is in its position where it is and it's configured the way it is for a very specific reason. We're going to be monitoring anything that we can see with the cameras for spacecraft performance. The imager teams at NASA are composed of dozens and dozens of very highly trained, very specialized people, engineers, technicians, analysts. If we can see it, we're going to try and keep an eye on it. Imagery has been invaluable throughout the history of NASA. We flew cameras on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, all of that stuff that we saw while the astronauts were on the moon. It helps us detect the unknown unknowns. It allows us to see things that we didn't anticipate happening before. So when we do fly people on Artemis 2, we can have a high confidence that everything is working the way it should.
I love getting a look at those teams that we don't normally see, like the red team that Megan and Kayla just got to interview. A really big thanks to them and everyone that made this liftoff happen tonight. So we are going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla now at KSC. Again, we're about 15 minutes away from perigee raise maneuver.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, we wanted to take us back into Orion and talk about some of the science that's being enabled by Artemis 1 today. So inside of Orion are 10 of these. So they're called CubeSats because they're tiny satellites. Essentially, they're the size of the shoebox when they're folded down, but then once they're deployed, they're opened up. They have solar arrays, things like that. That's when it gets a lot bigger. Now, these are called secondary payloads for this mission. Kayla, can you talk to us about what secondary payloads are?
Yeah, it just really means that it's not a primary objective of the mission. We're not relying on the success of these CubeSats for overall mission success. It's kind of a bonus payload, right? A chance to deploy these satellites that have different sensors on them and collect some awesome data to support other research objectives.
Yeah, and I know battery life was a concern for some of them, but all 10 were deployed, and scientists, I'm sure, are eager to see what kind of information that hopefully they'll be able to get. And they're just some of several research projects on this flight that will help gather data about the moon and more.
Artemis 1 is
paving the way for us to explore deeper and deeper into space.
I think Artemis 1 is significant on so many levels. It is a new frontier to do science.
So the primary objective is to test the Orion spacecraft integrated with the Space Launch System.
And it is designed to carry out the boldest of the bold missions.
But it's more than just learning how to travel in space. We're taking a lot of cool science along with us on this first mission to the moon.
So as NASA plans to go back to the surface of the moon and then onto Mars,
we want to spend more time there, and that's riskier business. So the more we learn about the moon itself and the environment where we'll be operating, the better we can prepare. We have 10 CubeSats we call secondary payloads, which are small scientific spacecraft of their own that will each be conducting their own scientific mission.
All of these payloads in some form or fashion will help us going forward. They are going to be studying the moon.
And they're going to help us understand what is the moon made out of, what types of rocks, what types of regolith, what types of ice, what's mixed in with water that might be present.
One of them actually is going to attempt to land on the moon. They're going to be studying the sun.
Understanding and studying the space environment or the space weather.
Some different propulsion systems. These novel ideas will ultimately turn into the technology and the systems that we want to use going forward.
There's a lot of cool things going on between all these CubeSats that make up our secondary payloads. Additionally, inside the Orion, we'll be flying an experiment to study space biology.
Space biology is where we study the underlying changes that Earth-based biological systems undergo when they're in space.
Or basically, how does life respond to the space environment?
The level of ionizing radiation that you experience when you go beyond the Van Allen belt, so you go beyond the protective magnetic sphere that we have around us, you then get exposed to higher levels of ionizing radiation. So we are flying several space biology experiments.
We will take a series of materials,
plant seeds, fungi, the yeast cell, algae,
and ride along the trip. And then when it comes home, we can analyze how they responded to that environment.
This research will help us thrive in space. It will help us to go further and stay there longer.
In addition to space biology, we'll be learning about how to make astronauts more effective in the Orion in the future. An example of that is something called the Callisto Technology Demonstration.
Lockheed Martin built the Orion spacecraft for NASA, and we'll be flying a secondary payload that's a demonstration payload called Callisto. So we took the technology from Amazon for Alexa and the WebEx technology from Cisco, and so we built a digital assistant, if you will, a custom space-qualified Alexa.
Alexa, how does the life support system work?
Orion's life support system is the environmental control and life support system oracles.
And so this payload is a demonstration mission to show how astronauts in the future could use this technology as an innovative user interface.
So there you have it. I hope you agree with me. This is exciting.
I am just over the moon excited for the Artemis 1 launch.
The science we'll conduct on Artemis 1 lays the groundwork to ensure that we can safely conduct scientific activities at the moon with our astronauts going forward. This really is the stepping stone for us as we take that next giant leap in space exploration.
So a lot of great science also happening on the International Space Station. I got to speak with astronauts Jessica Watkins and Samantha Cristoforetti while they were still on board about the research there that will benefit future Artemis missions. Jessica, Samantha, your primary job on the space station is to maintain the orbiting lab and conduct science experiments, more than 200 before Crew 4 returns home. Jessica, can you tell me about one of the experiments that will help return us to the moon with the Artemis program?
We do a lot of experiments where we are looking into developing new technologies that will enable us to go further into the solar system. And one of those technologies was the AstroRad experiment. Radiation is one of the challenges that we face when we think about going further into the solar system. And so this vest is an option for providing the crew member with protection. And then one of the mannequins on Artemis 1, launching here later this month, will also be wearing the vest. We'll get a sense for its effectiveness on board as well.
Samantha, I know that you've been doing a lot of work to test how we would grow crops in space. What crops are you growing on Space Station right now, and what's unique about them?
Indeed. Actually, right next to us as we are talking to you, we have a little space station vegetable garden. It's called uncrewed, and in a few weeks it will be full of fully grown, hopefully tomatoes and carrot plants. I don't have much of a green thumb, I must confess, but when I harvested those plants and I could really like breathe in all that smell, even if there is no soil, it still has that smell that you would associate on the ground with walking, through a vegetable garden after a rainy day, when there is that moisture in the air, and that was just so pleasant after such a long time living away from any kind of natural environment. It was very, very pleasant for me.
If it makes you feel any better, I also do not have a green thumb. So what about water? How are you testing critical life support systems like water to hopefully help us stay off Earth longer than we ever have before?
Sure. Yes. So we kind of use the tagline that yesterday's coffee becomes today's coffee. So there's a process by which we can filter our urine, and so we are at the point now where we are able to recycle about 96% of the essentially of our water on board, and are continuing to test new technologies to get even closer to the 98% utilization rate that we'll need for the moon in particular.
Samantha, what are you most excited about for Artemis 1?
Seeing that gigantic rocket take off, and I think it will be just a sign of all those great things to come.
Jessica, you could one day walk on the moon as part of the Artemis program. How does that make you feel?
The idea of being able to explore the surface of another planetary body, especially for me as a geologist and a planetary geologist specifically, is just super exciting. All of the science that we're going to be able to conduct from the surface of the moon.
Jessica, Samantha, thank you so much. And before you go, I'd love to see a flip. You laugh, I love it. And a double backflip at that. Now, Kayla, you, of course, lived and worked on the International Space Station as part of Crew 3. Do you enjoy, or did you enjoy doing all those science experiments while you were there? It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, it's incredible to be a part of every single experiment. It's an honor to play a small role in it. We got to do some really cool tech demonstrations while we were up there too. So for me as an engineer, that was really fun. That's a photo of me doing the first scanning electron microscope samples on the International Space Station. And it was cool for me because I worked with a scanning electron microscope in my graduate school research that took up it was as big as this desk.
Oh.
But seeing a miniaturized version of those that we have up there, and imagining how we could use it in a lunar or Martian laboratory to better analyze samples and decide what to bring home was really exciting.
Yeah, and you touched on this earlier before, but I do think it's just so important to note again that you're doing science for scientists who've been working on their studies for decades, some of them. So to fulfill that, how does that make you feel?
It's incredible. We're almost like their laboratory technicians for that little moment in time, but they've been working their entire life, sometimes decades, years, to get that science payload up there. And it's a really unique laboratory environment. The microgravity environment, the space environment, the radiation environment, like you heard talked about in those videos, provides an opportunity to do science that we just can't do here on Earth.
Yeah, and to think that what we do on the International Space Station can fuel future Artemis missions, I think the fact that they go hand in hand is really cool. All right, so let's take some more social media questions. Social media is buzzing right now since we launched about 48 minutes ago. So why don't we take the first question, I think again from actor, oh no, let's see, Kayla, how do you feel after launch?
Super inspired. I mean, we talked about it earlier with the Red Crew and in the moments just after launch, but this is really the culmination of a giant team effort. It takes every single member of our team to pull off a successful launch. It's incredibly complicated, incredibly challenging, and in some cases kind of dangerous for a Red Crew team who went inside the blast danger area to make a fix that was critical to today's launch. And so to see the team succeed and feel that excitement was incredible.
I really still have Charlie Blackwell Thompson's words ringing in my head. The fact that she said the harder the climb, the better the view.
Absolutely.
100% correct. All right, next question is from actor Jack Black. He starred in a movie called Apollo 10 and a Half. He has a question for Kayla.
Okay, Jack's final question, I promise. Let's talk about Orion. How long will it take for Orion to fly around the moon and come home? And what's that re-entry gonna be like? Sounds like it might be a little hot. Coming in hot.
You're exactly right, Jack. It is a 26-day mission that we have planned for Artemis, where it will go to the moon, go into a distant retrograde orbit, so we'll get a few close flybys and then some time in deep space past the moon. And then, yeah, that re-entry is going to be something else. It's going to be 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, super hot. And so we'll be looking at how the heat shield performs just to ensure that it'll be able to protect the crew for that speed and temperature.
That's half as hot as the sun.
Yes, it's incredibly hot, so we rely on that heat shield to keep our systems and our crew safe, but we expect that it'll perform well, but we're excited to see how it does in about 26 days.
Okay. One last question from social media.
And lift, we rise
what
together.
What qualifications are required to become an astronaut?
You have to study STEM. You have to have a master's degree or higher in a STEM field. But besides that, we're looking for people who are awesome team players. So there's a lot of different roads to become an astronaut.
We seem to be getting a lot of questions about how people themselves can become astronauts. I think that's really cool that we might see and inspire, again, people who might think about becoming astronauts.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kayla. And thank you for those who sent in those questions. We are about 50 minutes after the launch of Artemis 1. And we are approaching the next critical milestone, that's perigee raise maneuver. So let's head back over to Leah in Mission Control.
Thanks, Megan. And you're right, we are coming up on perigee raise maneuver about 2 minutes from now. We are now 51 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1 after lifting off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. The vehicle now traveling over 14,600 miles per hour. So during Orion's orbit of Earth, it reaches an apogee and a perigee. The apogee is the highest point above Earth's surface and the perigee is the lowest. Therefore, this perigee raise maneuver is a firing of the ICPS RL-10 engine, and it's going to raise the lowest point of Orion's orbit over Earth. This also included a checkout of Orion's systems and any adjustments to the solar arrays. All 4 of those solar arrays, as you can see, are swept back. That's going to keep them from having any loads imparted that might damage them for use later in the mission. This also, the perigee raise maneuver, will put us in the proper position for the translunar injection burn. That's that really big and long burn that we need to send us to the moon. We're about 1 minute away from the perigee raise maneuver. This is a shorter burn. It's less than 30 seconds. About 45 seconds until the perigee raise maneuver. Coming up on 53 minutes into today's mission, and we are standing by for the start of the perigee raise maneuver. Again, this is a firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. It's less than 30 seconds long. And we have confirmation of perigee raise maneuver ignition and full thrust. This is a live view from the spacecraft. Again, a really short burn. We're standing by for the cutoff. And we have confirmation of perigee raise maneuver cutoff. Flight Dynamics Officer reporting on the loops here in Mission Control Houston that it was a good burn. We are now 54 minutes into the flight, Orion traveling 14,700 miles per hour, and that was the perigee raise maneuver, lifting the lowest part of Orion's orbit around the Earth and putting us right where we want to be for the translunar injection burn. We're looking for that translunar injection burn to happen about 1 hour and 26 minutes after launch, so about 30 minutes from now. That'll be that long burn that helps us break free from the pull of Earth's gravity and commits the spacecraft to a lunar trajectory. So with successful completion of the perigee raise maneuver, I'm going to toss it back to Megan at KSC.
No, keep it.
I hope you didn't miss it, but if you did, we have a quick replay of the launch here.
Sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Four-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through.
Now to celebrate Artemis 1's successful liftoff is NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. Administrator, you got to share what you just told Kayla and I. You said that that was the biggest flame you've ever seen.
That's the biggest flame I've ever seen. It's the most acoustical shock wave that I had ever experienced. We were out on the roof of the Launch Control Center.
Burn-off igniters
and I'm telling you, you definitely knew that there was some energy being expended over there.
So what does it mean to be the leader of our organization for a historic launch like this? We've been talking about the team it takes to get this done. How does it feel to be at the helm of that ship?
3,
well,
2,
I got to talk
1.
to the Launch
Boosters
Control
in ignition.
Center team. And I
7.
said to them, you all are a part of a great legacy that has been many, many years coming, a lot of sweat and tears, and this legacy is now taking us as we explore the heavens. And it didn't end with Apollo 17, but this time we're going back and we're going to learn a lot of what we have to, and then we're going to Mars with humans.
Why is it such a priority for the agency to land the first woman and first person of color on the moon through this Artemis program?
Well, I think it's reflective of us. It's reflective of America. We are people.
And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated.
Emblem
7,
is E
6,
pluribus unum.
5.
In the chamber of the United States
3,
Senate,
2,
over that main
1.
door,
Boosters in
is
ignition.
E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And so our astronaut corps reflects that. And it's going to be the first boots back on the moon are going to be the first woman and the next man.
And another goal of the Artemis program is to spur economic development. Can you talk to us about how this program has been able to do that for the country?
Well, if you put it in NASA's economic report terms, it's billions of dollars affecting the economy, almost 400,000 jobs. But that's just direct. Think of all the indirect expenditures that are causing the economy to rise and more jobs. For example, what you guys are doing on the station, a lot of your research. Take, for example, the pharmaceutical research. You're helping already one drug that's being manufactured on Earth better because of what you learned in space, and that drug is attacking cancer. Now, what's the value of that? That's just additional value that is added. I remind everybody, in everybody's pocket, they've got a cell phone, and that's got a camera. And that's a camera on a chip that came out of the NASA space program.
That's right.
Absolutely. In addition to those innovative new technologies and the economic impact, I think for me, seeing this launch today, it's so palpable, just that human desire to explore. What do you think about what we're doing to inspire the Artemis and the generations to follow us?
Well, I think all you have to do is walk into a classroom of kids and look how their eyes get big when you start talking about space. And that is going to multiply itself manyfold as we go back to the moon and then on to Mars. It's also going to bring about a new generation of engineers and mathematicians and technologists and scientists, and all the benefits of that additional activity and education coming out of the Artemis generation. Look what that's going to do for our country and our economy, as well as for our international partners. And it's a great day.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Administrator, thank you so much for joining us for this momentous occasion. As you said, this is the beginning of a new age in space exploration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Kayla, that's going to do it for us here at the host desk. Launch was just the first step in a nearly 26-day mission. Our colleagues in Houston will now continue the broadcast to bring you the next big milestone to the moon. From Kayla and me, have a great day, and go Artemis 1.
Go Artemis.
And we had a great ride to orbit today. We are now 1 hour and 2 minutes since we launched the Artemis 1 mission. Orion is traveling with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now almost 15,000 miles per hour. We recently saw the perigee raise maneuver. That's where we lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth, and it puts us in the perfect position to prepare us for translunar injection burn coming up in about 25 minutes. So again, we are looking forward to that translunar injection burn. That's what it's going to commit us to our journey to the moon. And to tell us a little bit more about the translunar injection burn, we've got Dan Hewitt standing by. We've got Dan Hewitt standing by to show us on the moon board how it's all going to go down.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. So, translunar injection, this is the big one. Just a refresher, we're going to be using this, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is what's taken over for all of our in-space propulsion maneuvers after that core stage and those boosters have since dropped away. Modified upper stage from the Delta IV family of rockets from United Launch Alliance, hydrogen, oxygen, fueling the RL-10B-2 engine produces about 24,000 pounds of thrust in a vacuum. Now, the translunar injection is what's going to give us the energy to go from low Earth orbit all the way out here. Now, what does that mean? Here comes a really overly simplified orbital mechanics lesson. Let's say you're in orbit around a planet, say Earth, and you're in a nice circular orbit, but you want to have that orbit be even higher. Well, what you can do is fire your engine behind you, increase your speed, and that then increases the corresponding apogee, or the highest point of your orbit, on the other side, and that's how you raise it up. Well, if you wanted to make it into a nice circle, you could follow up and do another burn right here, and that would raise your perigee, or your lowest point, and then you're in a circular orbit around Earth. That's essentially called a Hohmann transfer. If you've ever followed our missions to the space station, that's what we're doing to kind of gradually raise our orbit until we get to the space station. But for this, we're talking about a lot more energy to get somewhere a lot farther away. So what we're essentially doing is we're going to be in this circular orbit around planet Earth, and we are going to be firing that engine with 24,000 pounds of thrust for about 18 minutes. And what that does is it doesn't just increase your apogee by a little, it increases it all the way out, and it's timed. So by the time Orion is hitting its apogee, the highest point of that orbit, the moon will have moved into position that you're entering into its sphere of influence. You're entering into that area where the lunar gravity is going to be able to capture you. And so that's why we're firing the engine for that long. We need to have that much thrust, that much time to get the energy to go out there. So that's the rough orbital mechanics of what we're doing. Now, after that TLI burn is done, the ICPS is going to separate. Its job largely done in the Artemis 1 mission. As we heard, it's got some secondary payloads up in this stage adapter here that it's going to deploy on its way out. The ICPS will have one more burn after TLI called a disposal burn. And what that's going to do is put it on a trajectory almost looking parallel to that of Orion, where it's going to go around the moon, slingshot away, and then go into what's called a heliocentric orbit. It's actually going to go into orbit around the sun. Actually going to go into orbit around the sun, just like Earth. It's going to leave the Earth-Moon system completely. And then after that, all of the propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module. So it'll be using its engines. It's going to do the outbound trajectory correction burn, at least the first one on flight day one, and a couple more until we get out to the moon and get ready to head into distant retrograde orbit. So that's TLI. It's coming up next. It's going to be a really big moment to pay attention to. So we'll send it back over to Leah to walk us through the ops. Leah.
Thanks, Dan. We are 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 15,200 miles per hour. Again, we've recently had the perigee raise maneuver, and in less than 20 minutes now, we'll be looking for the translunar injection burn that Dan just showcased that's going to send us to the moon. But our mission started off with an epic show from the Space Launch System. Again, the Space Launch System is what carried us into orbit today, launching off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. And we've got a couple of special guests from Marshall Space Flight Center. We have Bruce Tiller, the Solid Rocket Booster Manager, and Johnny Heflin, the RS-25 Engine Manager, to tell us more about the maiden voyage of the rocket. Now, they both got to watch it live at Kennedy Space Center. So a big hi to you, Bruce and Johnny. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, pleasure to be here.
And can you tell me a little bit about SLS performance today? Did it perform as you expected?
Go ahead, Bruce.
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
Sure. So I manage the booster part of the rocket, and the boosters were fantastic. They performed just as we expected. We got to see some of the data. Obviously, the team hadn't plotted it all, but the pressures looked great. You know, it burned for just the right amount of time, and it separated great. We could see that as well. So very pleased. We were confident it would work well, and it did. Very happy.
Similar story for RS-25. Nominal, what we call nominal performance. The engines performed exactly as predicted. based on the quick look data. Like the booster, we've got a lot of data to look at, but so far the data looks really, really good. These historic RS-25s that have 25 flights between them on coming off the shuttle program. So really looking forward to getting a look at the data. It looks really good so far.
That's fantastic, and we agree. It was amazing to monitor here, and the loops were very quiet in Mission Control Houston. That was a good sign. You knew that things were going well. So we know that the launch abort system was inactive for this mission, but it will be active for when we have crew on board for Artemis 2. Are there any other differences we can expect to see in the rocket for Artemis 2?
So for the boosters, by and large, no. If I talk about the boosters from top to bottom, we are going to make one change though, because of the crew is on it. We're going to have a delay timer in there so that if for some reason they need to abort, we have a few seconds there before, after they abort, before the termination system destroys the rocket. So we will add that, but other than that, nope, these boosters will be the same. Second flight is the first.
Same story for RS-25. It will be the next set of 4 heritage engines from the shuttle program. Configuration-wise, they'll be the same as what we flew today.
Then I'm glad it all went so well. And so after you get that data back from today, what's next for your team?
Well, for my team, we've still got a ton of work to do. We're not only, we're working on at least 3 flight sets at the same time, and so we've got 2 and 3 and 4 to work on. We also are working on a new booster that's a composite case design that will replace this steel case version that we're flying today. So we're excited about that, and there's a lot of work going on there as well. So we've got a lot to do, and we'll just keep doing it.
So RS-25, super busy as well. We have the Artemis 2 engines have already been delivered to MAF, and they're on schedule to be installed in the Artemis 2 core stage in mid-January. We're also about to start the certification test series for the new RS-25 engines that we're building. We have heritage engines for the first 4 flights. Beyond that, coming in on Artemis 5, we will fly what we call the RS-25 restart engines that have been redesigned to reduce cost and reestablish manufacturing for future flights. So we're really excited to get into that certification test series really soon as well.
All right, well, thank you both so much again for joining us. I'm glad that you got to watch the launch, and a major congratulations to you and your teams for all of the effort that you've poured into this. Go Artemis.
Great day.
Great day.
Thank
Fantastic.
you so much.
All right, and we are now 1 hour and 12 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1. We are traveling at orbital velocity. Again, Orion is currently attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which recently performed the perigee raise maneuver. And we are standing by for translunar injection burn, now less than 15 minutes away. It's going to be about an 18-minute burn that will commit us to the moon. Part of the Artemis program's goal is to inspire the next generation of dreamers and explorers. So we want to show you what students are doing right now to bring the Artemis missions to life.
NASA's Artemis mission will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon.
And today's students are the Artemis generation.
If you're a student, you can design and build technologies that support the Artemis mission with NASA's Artemis Student Challenges.
No matter your background or experience,
you're invited to choose a challenge that interests you, whether it's
rockets,
robots,
tools,
software, vehicles,
or other technologies, there's an exciting challenge for you.
So find a mentor and build a team of students.
review the rules and requirements,
and bring
your ideas
to life with NASA's Artemis Student Challenges.
Visit stem.nasa.gov/Artemis and see how you can join one of NASA's mission-related student challenges.
Again, 1 hour and 13 minutes, 30 seconds since liftoff today. We are looking towards translunar injection burn, now about 13 minutes away. That's going to send us to the moon. But did you know that you were invited to fly on the first Artemis mission too? Earlier this year, NASA asked the public to create a pass to virtually board Orion. Anyone who signed up got to include their name on a flash drive. I know my name is on there, and that flash drive is on Orion right now for its journey around the moon. It has more than 3.3 million names. The Orion spacecraft is designed to carry 4 crew members to lunar orbit, which we're preparing for on Artemis 2. NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik brought us through the hatch of the vehicle to show us where those future crew members will live and work during their journey.
This is the Orion crew station, where the crew will be when they fly the vehicle. As you can see, the commander seat's on the left, the pilot seat is on the right. Compared to the space shuttle, which had over 1,200 switches, controls, and circuit breakers, Artemis astronauts will have much less, only about 63. Inside, the crew of 4 can live and work for up to 21 days at a time, which is several days longer than the previous crewed Apollo missions to the moon. The interior is about 30% larger than those Apollo-era capsules to give more crew living and working space. Everything crew needs is packed right under the floor, thanks to the Orion stowage system. Under these panels is space for everything ranging from food, clothing, sleeping bags, to science and camera equipment, and even the tools necessary to perform repairs if required. On the upper part of the crew compartment, or what we call the overhead, is the docking compartment, a crucial component to future exploration. It allows crews to dock the Orion capsule to Gateway, NASA's next generation lunar outpost. Once they dock, crews will have the ability to board the lunar landers also attached to the Gateway and then head down to the surface of the moon. Through these windows, the 4 crew members will have amazing front row seats on their journey to and from the moon. Do you remember Apollo 8 and Bill Anders' famous photo of Earthrise as they came around the moon and saw it for the first time? Imagine being one of those first crew members on Orion, having their own modern-day Earthrise, and knowing they are traveling farther from Earth than humans have ever traveled before. Thanks to thousands of people from across the country and around the world who have helped with the research, design, construction, testing, and more testing. My fellow astronauts and I know that whoever gets selected for future Artemis missions, they're going to have the journey of a lifetime on board the spectacular vehicle we call Orion.
We're now coming up on 10 minutes until the translunar injection burn. Again, Orion is still attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. That RL-10 engine is what's going to perform the burn for us. But to hear more about Orion, I'm going to send it back to Dan at the moon board to tell us all about our spacecraft.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Welcome back to the moon board and Orion. So it's still attached to ICPS, still flying on the very upper part of SLS, but pretty soon it's going to be flying free. And after that happens, it's going to take over all of the propulsion, all of the flying, everything for the rest of the mission. And so to talk a little bit more about propulsion, let's focus in on this, the European Service Module. So this is what's going to be doing all of our maneuvers after we're done with ICPS and that translunar injection burn. And it's going to be doing that with a mix of 3 different types of engines. First one here on the bottom is the Large Orbital Maneuvering System engine. This one produces about 6,000 pounds of thrust. That's going to be doing a lot of your really major pushing maneuvers when we get into the powered flybys, the insertion into distant retrograde orbit, the burns to start sending us back home. That's the one that's really applying the most force. It can also gimbal, which essentially means it can swivel around, and that can help your steering. It's helped out by these 8 auxiliary thrusters. They're in pairs. Those are a little bit smaller. Each one of those produces about 105 pounds of thrust each, but they add some additional push to that orbital maneuvering system engine. And then we also have 24 reaction control system thrusters, these smaller ones that you can see all around Orion. Those are used for a lot of attitude control, so again, which they can help which way you're pointing, but also small translational maneuvers, so moving side to side, up, down, those can be called into play. Now, all of those engines share a common fuel source. They're using what are called hypergolic fuels, a mix of a fuel and an oxidizer, in this case monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. Now, those are long names, and they're hypergolic fuels. What does that mean? A hypergolic fuel essentially means you take your fuel and your oxidizer, you put them together, you get a reaction. You get an exothermic reaction, which creates that thrust, which comes out. You don't need an ignition source like we have on SLS, which is using oxygen and hydrogen. They're extremely reliable. They're very stable. You don't have to store them at cryogenic temperatures, which is really necessary for smaller spacecraft in orbit because it takes a tremendous amount of electrical energy just to keep fuels that cold. And so we can store them at a much closer to room temperature, essentially, when they're on board this spacecraft. So that's all of the primary propulsion that's going to take over. And again, that's going to be after we get through translunar injection. We're going to be doing correction burns on the way out, a number around the moon as we hang out in distant retrograde orbit for about a week, and then eventually sending us on the way back home. But still attached to ICPS right now, going to detach shortly after that burn is complete, and then Orion will be flying free, the service module pushing it for the rest of the way. So with that, I'll send it back over to Leah as we get closer to that TLI burn.
Thank you, Dan. And yes, indeed, we are looking for TLI coming up in about 7 minutes from now. Again, that's it's a long burn for us, about 18 minutes long. But before we get to that milestone, I have a friend of mine here. It's Stu McClung, the Program Planning and Control Office Chief of Staff for the Orion program. Stu, I am so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you. Good morning. Good to be here.
So how is the spacecraft performing so far, and what's next?
So far so well. Good. We were clean during the pre-launch and ascent. So the team's down the hall in the MER taking a look, working everything. It looks good so far, so that's good. And of course, we got the burn coming. After the burn, we'll start ticking through all of our planned events. Like we have the SAW modal survey. The wings will have a modal survey that we'll do later this morning. One of the first DTOs that we'll take a look at and evaluate how they react.
So DTO, designated test objective. What's another one of those that we'll be looking at over the next 26 days?
We have probably a good 100 of them. They, culminate from everything from like the modal survey to how the cooling system behaves, common track system. On entry day, one of our major test objectives is looking at how the heat shield and how it handles entry heating.
So how does it feel to be here today and see the future of human space exploration unfold?
It's great. I was doing my shift in the MER earlier today. Haven't slept. The emotion and the adrenaline's got me going. It's great to be a part of this. It's great watching watching the KSC team execute, and now this is day one for us. We've got 26 days for our team to execute now, and we'll go do our job and set the stage for future Artemis exploration.
And we're excited. We're going to be here along the way for all those major milestones, burns, all the other exciting events that we are looking forward to. So thank you so much for joining us here. We are really excited. A big congrats to you and your team.
Thanks. Let's go have a good burn and let's go to the moon.
Let's do it. We are now less than 5 minutes away from the translunar injection burn. Again, this is the burn that's going to send us around the moon, going to commit us to a lunar trajectory. It is approximately an 18-minute burn. It's a firing of that RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. You've got a view here of the White Flight Control Room in Mission Control Houston. This is where all of the teams will be monitoring the mission over the next 26 days. Teams monitored launch tonight. There are, of course, several different shifts that'll be working here. All right, we are coming up now on about 3 minutes until the translunar injection burn. Again, this is about an 18-minute long burn. Firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage commits us to lunar trajectory. It helps us break free from the gravitational pull of Earth. In case you missed it, in June of this year, we launched Capstone, a small satellite launched from New Zealand designed to test a unique lunar orbit for our future space station around the moon called Gateway. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. So we're very excited for that milestone. It really helps pave the way for our future Artemis missions. We are now 1 hour 20, coming up on 25 minutes since liftoff from Kennedy Space Center today at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. We had a really smooth ride to orbit. We saw solid rocket booster jettison, as well as launch abort system jettison. Eventually, we had core stage separation, which put us in the configuration that we have now, with Orion connected to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage and flying free. The solar arrays deployed and have been swept back in preparation for the translunar injection burn. Earlier, we had the perigee raise maneuver, which lifted the lowest part of Orion's orbit around the Earth, put us in this perfect positioning ahead of translunar injection burn. A good shot here of our two flight controllers. On the left, you saw Judd Freeling. He is the ascent flight controller. He's been with his team here for the last several hours. And to his right is Rick LeBrode. He's the lead flight controller for a majority of the rest of the mission. Judd's team will take over again once we get back into the re-entry portion. We're now less than a minute away from translunar injection burn. And this is a live view from the spacecraft. Australia towards the Pacific Ocean. This translunar injection burn will begin to take it away from the Earth, breaking it free from the pull of gravity. We're standing by for confirmation that the burn has started. We have confirmation. And this is a live view from the spacecraft. Australia towards the Pacific Ocean. This translunar injection burn will begin to take it away from the Earth, breaking it free from the pull of gravity. We're standing by for confirmation that the burn has started. We have confirmation from the booster officer that the translunar injection burn has begun and that we are at maximum thrust. Again, this is a long burn, about 18 minutes, 1960s, and it's a proven, reliable engine. This single engine has 25,000 pounds of thrust. We've already seen the ICPS in action today as it powered the perigee, the sun. Set of the Earth. This is the closest Orion will be to the Earth until it begins its return home from the maximum thrust. Maximum thrust. Again, this is a long burn, about 18 minutes, 1960s, and it's a proven, reliable engine. This single engine has 25,000 pounds of thrust. We've already seen the ICPS in action today as it powered the sunset of the Earth. This is the closest Orion will be to the Earth until it begins its return home from the moon. I'm going to keep reporting that number, and by the end of the gravity, now traveling at 17,000 sites, there are other burns that will take place throughout the mission. To direct Orion exactly where we want it to PS separates will be conducted by using the single main engine. Coming up on 2.5 minutes into the translunar injection burn, and we're now traveling over 18,000 miles per hour. Again, that speed is going to increase as well. This is really going to push Orion toward the moon, and we are now 252,400 miles away from the moon. And they include the Lunar Ice Cube, developed by Morehead State University in Kentucky. This will search for all forms of water with an infrared spectrometer. Luna Map from Arizona State University will create higher fidelity maps of near-surface hydrogen in craters and other permanently shadowed study the lunar environment. And Lunar by Lockheed Martin in Colorado will perform advanced infrared imaging of the lunar surface. Now 3.5 minutes into the translunar injection burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, traveling 18,560 miles per hour. Quiet on the loops here in mission control as the RL-10 engine continues doing its job on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. We talked about a few of our CubeSats. We also have one preparing to study an asteroid. The Near-Earth Asteroid Scout, or NEA Scout, by Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama will travel by solar sail to a near-Earth asteroid to take pictures of and make other characterizations of its surface. There's a CubeSat on board studying Earth called Equuleus by the University of Tokyo, along with JAXA in Japan. Equuleus stands for Equilibrium Lunar Earth Point 6U spacecraft and will travel to Lagrange Point 2, imaging Earth's plasmasphere for a better understanding of our planet's radiation environment. We're now coming up on 4 minutes and 45 seconds into the translunar injection burn, Orion traveling at 18,982 miles per hour. Our distance from the moon continues to decrease, now 251,900 miles away. To highlight some more of our CubeSats on board, we also have BioSentinel, developed by Ames Research Center in California, and will use a single yeast cell to detect, measure, and compare the impact of deep space radiation on living organisms over an extended period of time. Argo Moon was developed by the Italian Space Agency and Argotech in Italy. This CubeSat will observe the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, the stage that it's firing right now, with its advanced optics and software imaging system. And our last CubeSat through the Centennial Challenge is Team Miles from Florida, who developed a CubeSat that will demonstrate propulsion using plasma thrusters and will compete in NASA's Deep Space Derby. These CubeSats pack a ton of tech and science in a tiny package, so they don't all have redundant systems. And if any of the CubeSats missions don't go as planned, it does not affect our primary objectives of Orion's mission. This rideshare opportunity is a rare chance to send CubeSats beyond low Earth orbit, and we're looking forward to seeing what we learn. We're now 6 minutes into the translunar injection burn, Orion traveling at 19,500 miles per hour, being propelled by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Still quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams are tracking no issues during the translunar injection burn. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn, so we have approximately 11.5 minutes left. It's also been 1 hour and 33 minutes since liftoff today from Kennedy Space Center. That was a 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time launch. A smooth ride uphill, as we heard from Bruce Tiller and Johnny Heflin working with SLS at Marshall Space Flight Center. And this view from Mission Control Houston, teams continuing to monitor the Artemis 1 mission. This is where they will be around the clock for the next 26 days, all the way until we bring Orion home for a safe splashdown. Houston, teams continuing to monitor the Artemis 1 mission. This is where they will be around the clock for the next 26 days, all the way until we bring Orion home for a safe splashdown. Coming up on 7.5 minutes until into the translunar injection burn, so less than 11 minutes left in the burn. Orion now traveling at almost 20,000 miles per hour, 251,237 miles away from the moon. Again, that number continuing to shrink. Orion itself is still over Earth. It is over the Pacific Ocean south of Hawaii. As we've mentioned in today's coverage, multiple countries are represented in Artemis 1 through the SLS, Orion, and European Service Module, as well as the payloads riding along. While NASA is leading the Artemis missions, international partnerships will play a key role in achieving a sustainable presence on the moon while preparing to send humans to Mars. In 2021, over a dozen countries signed the Artemis Accords, which will establish a common set of principles to govern the civil exploration and use of outer space. The Artemis Accords will create a safe, transparent environment that facilitates exploration, science, and commercial activities for all of humanity. This cooperation not only furthers space exploration, but also enhances peaceful relationships between countries on Earth. We're now over 9 minutes into the translunar injection burn, an 18-minute burn, so we have about 9 minutes left. We're about halfway through. The RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust. Orion traveling attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now over 20,600 miles per hour. It's been 1 hour and 37 minutes since we launched today. Again, that was 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. Orion is still attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is the last burn for the interim cryogenic propulsion stage while attached to Orion. It will also have a disposal burn later on. About 10 minutes after we have ICPS cut off, Orion will separate from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage itself, and the capsule will be flying free, still attached to the European Service Module. We've got about 7 minutes left in the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling now at over 21,000 miles per hour. The RL-10 engine continues to fire on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, powering the translunar injection burn. This is the second firing of the ICPS today. The first we saw was the perigee raise maneuver, which lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and put it in the proper positioning for this burn. This is the burn that commits us to the moon. We're now over 12 minutes into this burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, so less than 6 minutes left, and 1 hour 39 minutes since we launched. Orion and the ICPS now traveling at over 21,400 miles per hour. And as I promised, we continue to grow closer to the moon, now 249,000 miles away. Now over 13 minutes into the translunar injection burn, putting us less than 5 minutes away from cutoff. We have had a nominal burn so far. That RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust, 25,000 pounds of thrust. We're now traveling over 21,730 miles per hour. And we've just heard the call for priority 1, meaning we have reached the point at which we could return at lunar return or similar speeds, testing the heat shield as required ahead of flight for Artemis 2. Now over 14 minutes into the translunar injection burn, less than 4 minutes until cutoff, traveling now at over 21,900 miles per hour. Now less than 3 minutes away from cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and coming up on 1 hour and 42 minutes into the Artemis 1 mission. The RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage continues to fire as planned at maximum thrust. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn. That's about twice as long as the ride to orbit today, so that just shows how much power we need to break free from the pull of Earth and take us to the moon. "16 minutes now into the translunar injection burn, Orion traveling at over 22,276 miles per hour. About a minute and a half now until cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Again, this being an 18-minute burn. We are now 248,280 miles away from the moon and continuing to grow closer, 605 miles away from Earth, and continuing to increase that distance. Less than a minute now until cutoff of the ICPS and the end of the translunar injection burn. We've had a good burn all the way through so far.
And here we go.
And 1 hour, 44 minutes since launch today. And we have cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which has committed Orion to the translunar conjunction. The spacecraft is moon bound. Orion is now traveling at 22,500 miles per hour, 247,450 miles away from Earth. Now that the interim cryogenic propulsion stage has completed its translunar injection burn, it is no longer needed to propel us to the moon. It's done its job and it will separate from Orion. After it separates, those 10 CubeSats we discussed will be deployed from the Orion stage adapter, which is below the service module and above the ICPS. Each payload will be ejected with a spring mechanism from dispensers installed on the Orion stage adapter. And again, these will help us study the moon and space weather, test innovative propulsion technologies, analyze the effects of radiation on organisms, and provide high-resolution imagery of the Earth and moon. The CubeSat deploys will start just short of about 4 hours after launch. Once those CubeSats are deployed, the ICPS will be on track for disposal in a heliocentric orbit, meaning it will closely circle the sun until destroyed. The next change we'll see is for the ICPS to separate from Orion and the service module. Those will continue flying free on their journey toward the moon. It's now been an hour, 47 minutes, and 30 seconds into the first flight of the Artemis program. Orion now traveling 21,860 miles per hour, 1,129 miles away from Earth. That stage separation from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, again, should be about 10 minutes after the translunar injection burn is complete, so approximately 7 minutes from now. Shortly after ICPS separation, Orion's service module will fire its auxiliary thrusters to move the spacecraft a safe distance away from the expended stage. Orion continues on an outbound path to the moon, and the Orion stage adapter attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will deliver several small payloads over several deployments. We're now over 1 hour, 51 minutes since launch today from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Orion is traveling attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, but not for much longer. We look for that separation to happen in about 5 minutes. At that point, Orion will still be flying attached to the service module, and in this animation, you can see the service module directly below the capsule. Those solar array wings are deployed. The spacecraft now traveling over 20,570 miles per hour, continuing to increase its distance from Earth, now over 1,780 miles away, continuing to decrease its distance from the Moon, 245,150 miles away. Hearing confirmation from teams here in Mission Control Houston that the solar arrays are in their proper configuration for interim cryogenic propulsion stage separation. Again, we just saw the translunar injection burn, a successful approximately 18-minute burn that has helped Orion break free from the pull of Earth's gravity and sending us toward the Moon. We're now standing by for separation from that stage now that it has done its job for Orion. However, it still has a job to do. It will help eject some CubeSats that will help us study the Moon, Earth, and the space environment. Orion now traveling at 19,700 miles per hour, 2,270 miles away from Earth. We're expecting that stage separation to happen in about a minute. As you can see, we have confirmation of interim cryogenic propulsion stage from Orion. With the Earth in the background and the Moon is our destination, Artemis generation, we are going. It's been 1 hour, 57 minutes, and 40 seconds since Orion launched atop the SLS from Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. After a smooth ride to orbit, a perigee raise maneuver, and a translunar injection burn conducted by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, Orion is now flying free, attached to the European Service Module and on its journey to the Moon. That might be the end of today's broadcast, but the Artemis 1 mission has only just begun. We'll continue live coverage for major milestones, including the outbound powered flyby and other major burns. But when we're not live, you can check out blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis and the NASA newsletter for updates on the spacecraft. We're also excited to introduce Artemis All Access. It's a short video product that will provide updates about mission accomplishments with a look at what's to come, as well as inside looks and explainers about the mission. And if you want to stay updated on mission activities and how to watch splashdown, you can still register as an online mission participant with NASA's virtual guest program to stay informed as the mission progresses. Virtual mission participants for Artemis 1 will receive curated resource and mission activities straight to their inbox. You can register at go.nasa.gov/virtualartemis1. That's a Roman numeral 1 as part of the URL. Don't forget, you can also learn about the mission on NASA and Artemis social media accounts. We'll be holding a post-launch news conference at Kennedy Space Center at 5 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 a.m. Central Time, and you can watch live at nasa.gov/live. We'll also be back on the air later today for the first orbital trajectory correction burn at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and again at 10:45 a.m. Eastern to get a look at the first images coming down from Orion. Thank you for joining us today for our coverage of the Artemis 1 mission. We leave you now with a rendition of our national anthem performed by Josh Groban and jazz pianist Herbie Hancock, followed by a look back on today's historic liftoff as we look toward every milestone in this mission. Artemis generation, we are going.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight?
Thank you for joining us today for our coverage of the Artemis.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air,
sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket.
Before docking.